Yeah, so what I'd like to do today is basically just give you an overview and sort of introduction really to the role of female agents in World War II. Now, I know some of you, some of you will have had some information already and know things. So if I'm trying not to bore those of you who are quite expert at it, so just bear with me. I say what I'll try and do is basically there's tons of information, which I'm not going to bore you with today, don't worry, but I'll try and point you in the right direction of people that want to look for more information. What I'd also like to do is talk about some of the social and cultural implications of what happened with these women, bearing in mind that, you know, the period in history that this happened and the role of women. And obviously I'm giving it from a woman's perspective. Once I've done a little tour, you'll see there's various equipment here. Now, some of you may know Nigel. He's the expert on anything, any technical issues, don't ask me. But I'm going to be talking about some of the equipment. But when I've finished, please come up and have a look, and you can have a feel of the weight and things of equipment. I've also got some pictures which I'm going to circulate at the end. When maybe, I don't know if we'll be getting another cup of tea, let's hope. But some pictures of various things to do with the war and women. I can pass those round and you can have a look. And I've also got a list of, just like an introduction to some books and films, for those of you that are new to it, that might point you in the right direction. So I can't manage a mic and my cards. So firstly, if I can just explain some of the main terms that you might come across in your films and reading, and again you may know, one of the first ones is the SOE. Now the SOE stands for Special Operations Executive. Now these were an English organisation, and they were actually instigated through Churchill. And it was, I think it was 1940 that they actually set them up. The equivalent in America is called the OSS, and again this is something you'll come across in your reading. And the OSS stands for the Office of Strategic Services, and these are actually the forerunners to the present day CIA. So obviously to do with, you know, spying and secret missions. So they're two terms that you will come across. So if I can just go on to talk about these women, who were they? Basically, the women that were recruited were very young, some as young as 15. So when I go on to talk about what they did, you'll see how, I mean, personally, I find it very shocking. And obviously you'll get your own perspective on things. But often they were very young girls, 15, early 20s. And the other thing about them is often they were married, they weren't single girls. So they had to leave their families and their children, and many of them had young children. So they were going off on these dangerous missions and giving up their present role. The other thing is the cultural situation. Now, if you bear in mind, this was in the sort of 40s, and if you think about the role of women at the time, there was no women's lib or anything. So one thing I'll go to talk more about is how women actually had to struggle in terms of dealing with going into what is quite simply very much a man's world. And war, I mean, it is changing now, but at the time it was hugely a man's world. So if you think about it, these women were young civilians, they weren't protected through the army, they were going into occupied countries, and you know, they were very, very dangerous things to do. So they were hugely brave, these women. And this is why I've always had them as role models. Again, I'll talk more about my perspective on them a bit later, but basically they were young women. Often they would be recruited because of their language skills. Anybody that could speak French was a huge advantage, and some came from, often they had one parent that was French, and so they were quite fluent. So it started, I think apparently the laws sort of lapsed a bit, but to start off with, they had to be very fluent in French. And the other thing was, if you think about it, I mean, we all talk about, oh, can you speak French? But if you think about it, what about the dialects? It's like in England, how many dialects do we have? So if a woman went to France and was in a different area with the wrong dialect, she'd be spotted straight away. So there was all these sort of intricate issues that they had to deal with. And one thing they did do was they were so into the detail in terms of what they wore. I mean, I'd be shot within a minute with what I wear. But basically, I mean, even down to things like the number of buttons they had on blouses, the type of stitching they had. If they had the wrong things that looked English, they'd be caught straight away. So the detail was really important. And they did get involved with a lot of disguises. And apparently, they used to even do things like have their fillings redone, because I don't know exactly what it is, but the fillings in England were different to the fillings in France. So some would actually have to have their teeth redone. So absolutely, the lengths they went to was absolutely amazing. But they had to try and be so careful because it was hugely dangerous, obviously, what they were doing. Now, the actual job that they were doing, the women were mainly couriers and worked on the radio. This is a Morse code radio, which Nigel actually built. And this is the type of radio that these women would work with. And they would travel around, they would be going through checkpoints, that they would be going to they had to keep moving, because once anybody got suspicious or tracked them down, they'd get caught. So they were travelling through France on their own. I mean, the actual courage of these women is incredible. And the other thing they had was various codes. And when I come on to talk about some of the films, some of you may have heard of the codes that they used, poems. These were all to do with the secrecy. Now, if a German actually caught the women and got the code, probably through torture, they could access England. So that they would then operate the radios, and nobody would know. They would think they were talking to these girls, but it would be the Germans doing it. So when we hear about some of the poems and the codes that the girls used, these were very important, and that was their way of staying safe. Some of the equipment that they carried, often, I mean, again, I don't know how they carried it, I'll be honest. I mean, obviously the radio was the main thing. You do hear some amazing stories. There's one very famous agent called Virginia Hall. I always want to call her Virginia Woolf. Virginia Hall. And she, would you believe it, had a wooden leg. And apparently she shot herself in the, I shouldn't laugh. She'd shot herself in the foot. And she had, from the knee down, a wooden leg. And she called it Cuthbert. This is the Cuthbert. This is the mentality of the women. How she did it is beyond me. But anyway, she did all sorts of. She's one of the top agents, if you get to read about her. But she managed it all with this wooden leg, and apparently she used it to her advantage, because she played on a disability. And one thing, just going back to the role of women, is I mentioned before that women were not, it was frowned upon at the time, women going into war or being soldiers, anything like that was frowned upon in England. But it actually worked to their advantage in Germany, because Germans would not suspect women. So basically they could get away with a lot more. They could hang around places, they could sit at roadsides. They used to do things like counting army vehicles going past, and basically what they call reconnaissance, which is information gathering. So they'd be doing a recce and getting information, but they weren't looked at with suspicion the way men might be. The other thing as well that women did was, and you hear a lot about, you know, like the Mata Hari and whatever, they did use their feminine wiles to get what they wanted often, which again, I find it really horrible. But, you know, they would often, you know, sort of chat to guards and arrange dates with them and whatever, so they did use it to their advantage. But I mean, they didn't always go on the dates, but it would, if they were going through checkpoints, that, you know, that they would use their sort of feminine wiles to be more friendly and get what they wanted. There was another lady, apparently her name was Paddy. Now, I think she's American, but I'm not sure, but she had one of these suitcase radios, and she was going through a checkpoint, and one of the guards actually said to her, what's in your suitcase? Because obviously they look like clothes and whatever. And she said, it's a Morse code radio. And he laughed. Because, I mean, she had the gall to actually tell the truth, but nobody would believe that. You know, they would think, oh no, she's just joking about it. So that they were the main jobs that they did. There's a lot of talk of things like sabotage. I don't know, I don't think women did a lot of blowing up trains and things. We have got some dynamite here, which don't think it's real, is it, Nigel? But Nigel will tell you about.
So.
No.
I bought it off the guy in the pub here.
But yeah, I think it was mainly the couriers, you know, going between people with information, passing messages, and being on the radio. And apparently, that people would know. I don't know if any of you know Morse code, but people would develop their own, what do you call it? Their own
keystroke.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, their own sort of. People would recognise the women from how they actually type the messages, and they were known as pianists because they were always tapping out the messages, and so these women were known as pianists. The other thing that you might be interested to know is the actual life expectancy. Has anyone got any idea roughly? No, how long they would survive going into these countries?
4 years, maybe. No,
4 years. Yeah, the average expectancy was 6 weeks. I know. And bearing in mind the age of these women, it's really frightening.
Suicide mission, isn't it?
Yeah, but one thing, it is really. I mean, one thing with the equipment, the type of equipment the women had, they did have small pistols. Obviously, it was very hard to they had them in purses and things. And we have got one here to show you, but they would be equipped with pistols. But they weren't like somebody in the army who would be equipped with guns, and they didn't have the backing of the army. But yes, you can come and have a look at this equipment after and have a look at what they had. They were also provided with cyanide pills. Now, I used to think personally that if they got captured, they would be so frightened that they'd take this pill, because obviously it would be instant death for them. But a lot of the reason was because if they were captured and tortured, they could eventually give out the information. So in some respects, it was preferred if they would take the pill, rather than give out information that could get so many people killed. So quite sinister, really. I don't know of any women that actually took it, but I know that they were given that. This is something they were equipped with. The other thing, just going back to the sort of cultural side of this, is women were recruited through quite high-ranking officers who were basically very middle class. Now Nigel here today is actually, he can tell you more about his uniform, but he's actually dressed as an American officer.
I said that, yeah.
Yeah, it is American, but he can tell you more about what he's wearing. But basically, it was very middle class initially, but the women that were recruited were often working class women. So not only were they going into an environment that was very male orientated, they were also mixing with different classes of people, and the culture would be probably more marked in those days than it is now. So that was something else to contend with. But it was things like, for example, if a lady was very middle class and she was working on a French farm as a peasant, how she ate her soup, this was quite a good story. If she was sipping her soup daintily, that would be enough to get a shot, because women, the French peasants, didn't eat like that. Basically, they would wolf the food down. So all these cultural things had to be taken into account, because any mistake would give them away. So now the other thing I mentioned before is about it was very much a man's world, and this was very much the case. So the women did train with the men. Obviously there were men in the SOE, and the women did the same training. And if you think about it, they had a heck of a time, really, because they would have a lot of prejudice against them. Something I found, I used to do reenacting with my friend here, Nigel, and he will tell you, we went to car shows, and this is my perspective on things. And what I found is that I started going to car shows because my initial interest came from, I don't know if any of you know Odette, who was one of the famous agents. I watched that film when I was very young, and that was my transition into agents. And Odette, if you haven't seen it, it's a fantastic film. But anyway, that was my interest. So when I met Nigel, he took me to car shows. Now, car shows is where you do get a lot of reenactors. But I'm sure he won't mind me telling you, because I told him often enough that I couldn't stand them, because these car shows, in my opinion, are so male orientated. I mean, they're even called Toys for Boys and things. And people going to these shows, they were very interested in the guns, in the vehicles. But I wasn't interested in any of that, which is why I thought I would develop my female agent role. But I'll tell you what, I had my work cut out just at car shows. And because people basically weren't interested, because it's not that visual. And again, I used to say to myself, well, look at what these women used to put up with. And I was only a friendly car show, really. I remember one thing that really annoyed me. I used to set up with a little table and put the radio and whatever on it. And some bloke came up and he asked me if somebody was at the show. He thought I was show secretary. But you know, I was fuming. I thought, do I look like a secretary? Obviously I did. But again, it taught me a lot about that was nothing compared to what the women in the war were actually dealing with, the prejudice, and they'd be looking at the time. I mean, women, obviously we know they went into factories and did a lot of work, but they were just women at home. They were the housewives, and it was these women that were then going into these situations, dealing with men, taking on men, often taking on German soldiers. They were trained in all sorts of self-defense. Often, they would kill people, and they learnt all these techniques. I have got some information that I will show you about that In fact, I will move on now because I feel as though I've been talking enough, and I will show you the information I've got, which I've lost. Have I got some leaf? Yes. Bear with. Does anyone used to watch that Miranda? Bear with. What I'm going to do is pass these round, so I won't try and show you them from here because I'll probably drop them on the floor anyway. But the types of things I've got, I don't know if any of you know, well, some of you do know that I run a group on Facebook. Give a name? Yeah, on Facebook. And the picture I have for that is it's the memorial in Waterloo. Now I'll show you this. I mean, you can have a proper look in a minute. So I could be trying to show you from here, but it's the one at it's the one at the Five Lamps, and I'm actually quite proud of this.
I'm 58.
I'm actually quite proud of having this picture because not only because I took the photo myself, but in the group we have people from all different countries. So this is the actual memorial. I don't know if any of you will know it. Right by the Five Lamps in Waterloo. You know Great George's Road? Yeah, so I'm quite proud that our picture, which is being shown, and we've got people in Poland, Italy, France, and yet the picture for our group is a local picture. So, you know, anyway, you can have a look at that. Sorry, I can't manage. Yeah. Can I just shout for a minute? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'll try and shout, I can't. Basically, the other information that you'll see is Morse code, an example of Morse code that you can have a look at. And it actually teaches you, if any of you want to try and learn it, it will teach you how to do it. You can have a look at the sheet on that. SOS. Well, SOS is probably quite useful. Now, I do have a real fake ID. Now, this is one I had done. Yeah, it's a real fake one, which is the sort of ID that the women agents would have when they went abroad. Now, what interested me about this, I got this done for myself by a reenactor. And I used to be known, some of you will know this, when I was reenacting, I used to be known as Molly Biger. That was my name, and that would have been my name if I'd gone abroad. And so this name is on my ID, and I'm actually down as a baker. Now I know how to eat cakes. That's about as far as it goes. But what I would tell you, which is quite sinister about this, not just my photo, but when I sent my photo to him, you had to actually have your profile, because at the time they wanted to know the shape of your nose to see if you were Jewish. So on this you'll see it's taken from sideways on, and they also asked the colour of your skin in terms of that it had to be olive, which would be French. So again, I found it, even just getting this fake ID done, I found it a bit creepy, you know, and yet this isn't even for real. But anyway, I've got my ID there that you can have a look at, and this would be the same as what the women would actually use. So that's one bit of info. I've got loads here. I've got information on the radio, but Nigel can tell you about that if you want to have a look at the Morse code radio. One thing that I would like to stress is when you come and have a look at things, and again this is something that's always absolutely intrigued me, is the weight of the radio, makes you feel the weight of it, and the weight of Sten guns. Now, Sten guns were often the guns that women would acquire. They would either steal them when they got there or get them off dead shot soldiers. And you'll see them on the films with these Sten guns.
Is that like an alien machine gun, is it? A Sten gun?
Yeah, they were made in Britain. They were designed and first made in Britain. And the wonderful thing about the Sten gun is it was designed so that it would come apart and it would practically fit inside a shoebox.
Oh, your handbag.
So
Your handbag.
strip down into lots of different pieces, and they can send them, drop them really easily. And the things just look like pieces of piping.
Yeah.
So they're very, very simple made, and they could hide them. They could probably hide them in a wooden leg if they had to.
Oh yeah, that's it, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but again, if you just think about it from a woman's perspective, just feel the weight, and you see them on the films, and they're running around these films and shooting people and whatever. But I think, how on earth to, I mean, these girls were very young, very slight, very young, like myself. And yet they were carrying these hugely heavy things with them. And again, I find it amazing. So anyway, I've got some more pictures of other equipment, like knuckle dusters and things that they were nice gory things for you to have a look at. I also have some pictures of some of the most famous spies. One thing that is interesting is because they were civilians, they couldn't get military medals, even though they were hugely brave and they did get medals. But I think only 4 women in the war at that time received the Victoria Cross, and 3 of the 4 were agents. So that just shows you how much they were rated. And that was Violette Szabo, who you may have heard of, Odette, and the 3rd one was an Indian lady called Noor Inayat Khan, who I'd never heard of, but she's very famous.
How did she get away with being French?
Because she was olive skinned, wasn't she?
Yeah. I've got pictures of it, you can have a look. So, again, Violette Szabo.
Just to interrupt.
Yeah.
Well, the French would actually have, like we have our colonies. The French have,
Algeria,
have
like
French,
Algeria.
Morocco, and
Yeah.
so on.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
it
they
wouldn't
speak
be
French,
so
don't they?
unusual for someone of a different colour to be in
It's just when you
France
see the war films,
potentially.
you don't see them in the films.
No,
That's
no,
Hollywood,
that's-
isn't it? Hollywood, that.
yeah. That's in Britain, probably not really the way
They
it
never
would be when
portray
they make
all
the
these
movies.
as like all white, aren't they?
Did they get
Well,
paid?
yeah, they don't highlight it, sorry.
Did they get paid, these girls?
I assume.
Did they get a wage?
Well,
Just the wage, wouldn't it? Like
yeah, they
But
must have been provided for.
and expenses that they would have to
Yeah,
buy things.
it's to be honest with you, I don't know. It's a good question, but they would have had some finance. Yeah, probably not a
They'd have to
lot.
give them the money for the country they were in.
Yeah.
They might
Yeah,
get
they would have to.
Did they dig
get to
some
buy
things?
stuff. Yeah.
Having said that, I think they were very much living from hand to mouth. They were moving round and they were reliant. I mean, often they'd probably be getting their tea with a local French farmer or something, So it was very much hand to mouth. It wasn't organised like your army supplies.
No.
Okay, you're doing as you
Sorry?
It might give you something if you come back alive. It
Yeah.
might give you a hand up.
Well, that's it. Yeah.
I think
So
I
I've
think
got-
you basically get back pay, wouldn't you,
Yeah,
when you
you're not
return
gonna
from
pay
a
it,
mission?
You're going to peg it or get
Because it's no good in paying you and whatever you're earning if you're being in another country. So somehow they'd have to fund them with
Yeah.
the currency needed there.
Yeah. But they wouldn't have had much. So I've got some pictures there for you to have a look at. I've got, for those of you interested in,
How many of these spies survived, like the war?
well, that reminds me of something that's very important, is many of them disappeared. And there's a lady called Vera Atkins who's, again, worth knowing. Vera Atkins actually recruited the women, and she was known as the spy mistress. She was very middle class. She used to recruit them, and she would call them my girls. Now, at the end of the war, because of all the prejudice, these women were just forgotten about.
I see.
They weren't acknowledged. And anyway, Vera Atkins went on a mission to try and track them down. to find. I mean, most of them had been killed, most were dead, but she did go and try and find them to at least find out what happened. She found it was her duty. We've got a very interesting lady, Vera Atkins, but she went. Yeah. So, yeah, I've got some information about the training, about what they would be trained in, and what the philosophy was, but I'll let you read through that yourself.
Can I just interrupt there?
Yeah?
I would have thought, well, a lot of the women, I think, were not allowed to say anything they'd done during the war.
No, it was hugely secretive.
Yeah, so they potentially would be into their 80s, maybe now, you know, not very long ago, before they would even blab what the sort of things which they did.
Many took it to the grave. Yeah.
The
I mean,
Official Secrets Act and so on.
one lady called Jacqueline Nairn, she died, and a lot of them died as recluses. And nobody, it's only when they went through her house that they found this information. Yeah, she died on her own.
Yeah,
She had a sister.
Blackpool or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. But they would take it to the grave, these women. And it was so intuned in them that they wouldn't tell anyone. So they didn't die as heroes, and this is why I like to try and promote it. It's because they didn't die as heroes despite what they did. They died very lonely, isolated women with no support, which is it's very, very sad. You know, considering they were ignored, really. I mean, now, exactly, and this is my point with it, that it was very much a man's world, and it still is. In that respect, so many of the World War II, anything to do with acknowledging them, it's men all the time, and this is why I like to try and promote what the women did, because it was so important. I've got some. I don't know if any of you have come across Ravensbrück concentration camp. That was specifically a camp for women, and a few of our ladies were killed there. Again, there's a memorial. You can have a look at that. Look at some of the pictures. I've got some pictures of Vera Atkins, so you can have a look at. One thing, I'm going to stop talking to you now. If I can just pass round. Oh, thank you. Just some of you may know of a lot of these, but it's just a sort of introduction to books and films. If you want to have a look at that, I'll just run through it with you once you get it. I think we should have enough for one each. Thank you.
No, just 2 days ago.
That's Nicola.
That's enough.
Good.
Lots of women with cold springs as well, when they
I mean, that's...
Then they put in the papers, they had what's the name, like kind of quiz things, crossways, and if they did them, they solved the crossways and they used to get the spinned in these and they
It's what, sorry?
I said they used to put crossways in the paper, and they had competitions, and whoever passed them when they sent them off, they used to pick up a lot of the code papers.
Oh yeah, they did. Yeah. I mean, that is a whole area in itself, Bletchley Park, fascinating place. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, a lot of women working there. Yeah, yeah. It's somewhere I'd like to go. Have you gone out?
Finished now.
Got a coach up to
Oh, it's in Buckinghamshire. If there's not enough, can people just share? You can always get more photocopies. Just to have a look at while I run through it.
There's all the biscuits being
So can I just mention some of the books? Everyone got access to a sheet at least. I can get more photocopies done. Basically, some books, I mean there's millions of books, but just for some suggestions, The Spy Who Loved, this is written by a lady called Claire Mully, who is actually part of our group. on Facebook, Female Agents. And this is about Christine Granville, who again is one of the top spies. Very interesting book. The next one, The Secret Ministry, that says The Secret Ministry of Agriculture and Fish. Now, Noreen Reels, again a very famous lady, and she was recruited by the SOE to recruit women, and she told her family that she worked for the Ministries of Agriculture and Fish. That was her cover. So nobody actually told them who they were working for, but a very interesting book.
I think, you know, excuse me, you know, when they only lasted 4 weeks, what did you tell the families if they had a cover, if they were just an ordinary cover job? How would they explain to the families that they got killed? You know, if they only
I couldn't tell you, I could only guess. It's an excellent
they've got little
question.
children and that,
Yeah. I mean, it would have been, because they didn't know what they were doing. Or they might have, I mean, a lot of the families thought they were working for the more accepted areas. Yeah. But next one, Young, Brave and Beautiful, Tanya Szabo, you may have heard of, very famous spy, an excellent book. Spy Mistress by Vera Atkins, the lady that I mentioned that went and tried to track them all down. Spy Princess, the Indian lady, Noor Inayat Khan. She was well, I don't want to spoil alert, but I mean, she was another lady that was killed and tortured. But she was actually a very rich princess. Fascinating story. So if you have a look at these books, Odette, who a lot of you will know of, she was known as the Darling Spy. That was her name. Films that some of you may have seen. Just a couple to point in the right direction. Odette. Don't know if any of you have seen Odette. And Carve Her Name with Pride, which I have to say is my favourite film of all time. If you're only going to watch one film, as you say, watch Carve Her Name with Pride. It's absolutely fantastic, and it gives you a really good insight. Something that I mentioned before, for those of you who are on Facebook, I know some of you are on my group. I do have a group where I post various pictures and articles. So if you're interested, sign up. And right at the bottom here, again for those of you on computers, on YouTube, there's an excellent YouTube video. Eventually these women were acknowledged with a memorial in Thamesford. Now RAF Thamesford is where the women used to fly out from down south. And Prince Charles, it's a really good video if you get a chance to have a look. I've put the link on here for you. It was only done a few years ago. Prince Charles actually, what's the word, opened it, whatever. I've got pictures of the memorial, it's got all the ladies' names on it. And the talk there is done by Tanya Szabo, who was actually Violette Szabo's daughter. Violette was one, if not one of the most famous spies. Her daughter Tanya is on our group, and she does the talk there, and she reads out the poems. So if you watch the film, you'll understand about the poems and their significance. But and also Claire Mully is on this. It'd be good really if at some point we could really watch this clip together, maybe. And I could point people out because Claire Mully is on it, Noreen Reels. But it's a good link to have a look at. Anyway, I think I've exhausted myself, if not you. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pass these round so you can all have a little browse. And if you want to come up and have a look at the radio and feel away to things, and technical questions, gear them to Nigel, not me, because I haven't got a clue. And I will leave you to it. Thank you very much. Thank you.